They laughed when I pulled into the driveway, the old car sputtering like a dying animal. Vanessa smirked, her voice cutting through the air. "Emma, is that relic still running?" My cheeks burned, but I smiled, hiding the truth like a weapon behind my lips. What they didn't know was that humiliation has a strange way of fueling fire. That night, as I scrolled through the confirmation email on my phone, the words gleamed back at me. "Your Tesla Model X order is complete." And in that moment, I swore their laughter would choke them one day. The Carter family gathered around the long oak dining table, the chandelier above casting warm light that made everything look softer than it truly was. Laughter spilled into the room, sharp and careless, as glasses of wine clinked and conversations overlapped. I sat at the far end next to my husband David, wearing my calmest smile. My hands rested politely in my lap, though every nerve in me trembled like the engine of the car I had parked outside. It was Vanessa's birthday. She adored the spotlight, the admiration, the constant validation that she was the jewel of the family. Tonight, she wore a silk dress that shimmered under the light, her hair pinned perfectly. She waited for the right moment to deliver her performance, and I felt the target long before she opened her mouth. "So, Emma," she said suddenly, tilting her head as though she were genuinely curious, "is that car of yours older than you are?" The laughter that followed was instant, a ripple through the family. David shifted uncomfortably, but he said nothing. His silence stung worse than Vanessa's words. I forced a laugh, quiet and airy, as if the insult slid right past me. My smile was steady, but beneath it burned the memory of my father. That old sedan wasn't just metal and rust. It was the last thing he left me before he passed. To them it was a joke, but to me it was a relic of love, of struggle, of history. Their laughter cut into that memory like a knife. I reached for my glass of water, letting the rim touch my lips while my eyes met Vanessa's. She wanted me to flinch, to show weakness. Instead, I gave her a smile so calm it almost unnerved her. If only she had noticed the flicker in my eyes, the glint of something sharp and deliberate. But she didn't. None of them did. The evening stretched on, every word from her laced with condescension, every chuckle from the others twisting deeper into my skin. I remained the silent shadow at the table, my mind miles away, weaving threads they couldn't see. When dessert was finally served, I excused myself under the pretense of checking a message. Out on the porch, the night was cool and the air smelled of autumn leaves. My phone lit up in my hand, the glow casting sharp lines across my face. And there it was, an email confirmation that made my pulse surge. "Your digital asset portfolio has doubled in value." My lips parted, the smallest laugh escaping before I could stop it. They thought I was trapped in mediocrity, tethered to that old car, scraping by. They had no idea. Beneath their noses, I had been building something they couldn't even begin to imagine. For months, I had poured my expertise into a project most people dismissed as speculation: cryptocurrency investments, fintech startups, the future of money. To them, it was all smoke and mirrors. To me, it was freedom. I had played the part of the humble wife, the woman who drove a relic and kept her head down. In truth, I was positioning myself at the center of a financial revolution. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint against the glow, and whispered, "Not yet. They don't deserve to know yet." The laughter from inside spilled out through the windows, muffled but mocking. I could almost hear Vanessa repeating her little line, milking it for one more round of amusement. The humiliation I had endured tonight no longer felt like pain. It felt like fuel. Every sneer, every chuckle, was a match striking against the steel of my resolve. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and smoothed the folds of my dress, returning to the table with the same calm smile plastered across my face. Vanessa was mid-story about her new designer handbag when she noticed me. She smirked, expecting me to cower in silence. But this time, when I sat down, I didn't just smile. I looked directly into her eyes and let her see that flicker, just for a second. A glimmer of something she couldn't name but would one day understand. They thought I was invisible, powerless, small. They had no idea that I was holding a storm behind my smile. And when it broke, it wouldn't just wash away their laughter, it would drown it. The following week, I walked into Vanessa's sunlit kitchen, the smell of roasted coffee clinging to the air. She was perched on a bar stool, tapping through her phone as if the world revolved around her fingertips. I cleared my throat softly, letting hesitation lace my words. "Vanessa," I began, carefully lowering my eyes. I was wondering if you might be able to lend me a little money, just enough to fix the brakes on my car. They're getting bad." Her head snapped up, the corners of her lips tugging into a smile that was far too eager. She lived for these moments, for proof that I was, in her mind, a dependent parasite clinging to her brother's stability. "How much are we talking?" she asked, voice dripping with amusement. "Maybe $300, I whispered, as though it cost me my dignity to ask. She leaned back in her chair, laughing, then pulled out her phone. "Oh my God, wait until I tell Mom. She said you'd come crawling eventually. I mean, Emma, brakes. You can't even afford brakes." Her laughter cut sharper than any blade, but I kept my head bowed, my voice soft. I needed her to believe this performance, to carry my supposed weakness like a trophy. By evening, I knew the story had traveled. Margaret, my mother-in-law, had called David with a clipped tone of disapproval, muttering about how embarrassing it was to have a daughter-in-law begging for pocket money. The words hit David harder than me. He barely met my eyes at dinner, chewing silently, his discomfort palpable. It was exactly what I wanted. The more they thought I was fragile, the deeper they would bury themselves in arrogance. And arrogance always blinded. But as I sat alone that night, the contract in my bag pressed against my side like a hidden blade. I pulled it out, smoothing the crisp paper under the dim glow of the lamp. Across the header, bold letters spelled the name of a rising fintech company, Aurelia Systems. My name was inked at the bottom, not as an employee, but as a shareholder. The memory of signing that paper still sent a shiver down my spine. Months ago, while they mocked my old sedan, I had been sitting in quiet boardrooms, listening to engineers talk about blockchain integrations, AI-driven credit platforms, the future of finance. I had seen the spark before the world noticed the flame, and I had invested. Not timidly, but boldly, with everything I had saved, everything I had learned from years of working numbers like puzzles. Vanessa thought she held power because she could buy handbags and post them on Instagram, but true power was invisible until it chose to reveal itself. I folded the contract neatly, slid it back into my bag, and exhaled slowly. They saw me as a beggar, but I was already sitting on wealth that could buy not just new brakes, not just a new car, but a fleet of Teslas lined up across the driveway. The irony made me smile in the dark. A week later, Vanessa cornered me at another family dinner, her voice carrying enough volume for everyone to hear. "So, Emma, did the brakes get fixed, or are you still waiting on me to rescue you?" Her laughter rippled across the table, Margaret's joining in like an echo. I sipped my water calmly, letting them have their show. Inside, I felt the weight of silence, the delicious, heavy silence of a secret no one could touch. That night, while they laughed in the living room, I sat in the guest room with my laptop glowing. I logged into my investment dashboard, numbers flickering like constellations across the screen. Aurelia's valuation had soared. My shares had doubled again. I leaned closer, my pulse steady, eyes narrowing as I clicked confirm on a new purchase. A Tesla Model X, custom ordered in deep midnight blue. The payment went through instantly. A small private notification popped up on the screen. Order confirmed. I closed the laptop, sliding it beneath the pillow, and lay back against the mattress. The faint sounds of laughter carried up from downstairs, mocking and hollow. Let them laugh, I thought. my fingers resting lightly on the fabric above where the laptop hid. Let them laugh until their voices break. When the time comes, their laughter will not survive the silence that follows. The video was less than 30 seconds long, but it was enough. Vanessa stood in front of my old sedan, the camera angled just so to capture the dense and faded paint. Her laughter filled the background, sharp and cruel. "This is what my brother's wife drives," she announced, grinning into the lens. "Can you believe it? A car older than her marriage." By morning, the clip had gone viral on TikTok. Comments flooded in. Laughing emojis, cruel jabs, strangers piling on the joke. My name was never mentioned, but everyone in town knew whose car it was. The whispers followed me into the grocery store, into the cafe, even into the school parking lot where mothers exchanged looks behind manicured hands. For a moment, the humiliation was suffocating. The car had always been more than metal to me. It was a piece of my father, a memory I carried with pride. To see it turned into a circus act cut deeper than I could admit out loud. But humiliation, I had learned, could be alchemy. It could transform into something else entirely, if you knew how to wield it. I sat at my desk that night, laptop open, a second phone glowing beside it. On that phone, I scrolled through a TikTok account with no name, no photo, nothing that could be traced back to me. From this shadow, I began to fan the flames of Vanessa's mockery. Anonymous comments, subtle shares in the right groups, small nudges that pushed the video further into the algorithm. Every cruel word they wrote, I amplified. Every sneer, I made louder. The goal was not to silence Vanessa. It was to let her voice rise so high it would shatter under its own weight. "Go ahead and laugh," I whispered into the dim light of the room, eyes locked on the screen, "because your laughter will be the trap that swallows you whole." Days later, the video wasn't just a family embarrassment, it was a local scandal. News outlets picked it up as an example of family shaming gone wrong. Influencers weighed in, some condemning Vanessa for bullying, others mocking me further. The Carter name, once polished and respected, became the butt of online jokes. At the dinner table, Margaret's face tightened with every mention. David sat in silence, chewing his food as though it might keep him from speaking truths he wasn't ready to face. Vanessa, though, was radiant, basking in her digital fame. She didn't see the cracks forming beneath her. And then the twist came. While her video spread like wildfire, I slipped another story into the blaze. A subtle PR campaign, funded through my silent account, framed the narrative of resilience, of ordinary women mocked for living within their means. At the center of this quiet wave was a new fintech company, Aurelia Systems, promoting financial empowerment, dignity, and independence. The logo appeared in comment sections, in sponsored posts that slid seamlessly into the feeds of those who had laughed at me hours before. The message was clear. Aurelia was here to give power back to people like me, the underestimated, the overlooked. And who owned Aurelia? Who had poured everything into its rise? Me? Vanessa thought she controlled the narrative, but she was merely a puppet dancing in the firelight. Her laughter was the megaphone that carried Aurelia's name farther than I could have managed alone. The irony was intoxicating. At a cafe one afternoon, I overheard two strangers watching Vanessa's clip. "It's cruel," one said, shaking her head. "But have you seen that company, Aurelia? They're talking about building tools for women like her. That's powerful." I stirred my coffee, hiding my smile. The trap was working. The night before the reveal, I stood at the window of our bedroom, the city lights glimmering in the distance. My phone buzzed with a notification. Tesla order, delivery date confirmed. Another buzz followed seconds later. Aurelia Systems IPO scheduled for tomorrow, 10:01 a.m. The timing couldn't have been more poetic. Tomorrow, the same day I would drive a brand new Tesla into the Carter driveway, Aurelia Systems would go public. The woman they mocked for begging $300 would stand revealed as one of the minds behind a multi-million-dollar company. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, the night stretching wide before me. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was probably still scrolling through her comments, delighting in the attention. She had no idea she was carrying my name, my company, my power into the mouths of thousands. The shadow she had cast over me was long, but it was hers, not mine. And tomorrow, when the sun rose, it would be her shadow that dissolved, leaving me standing in the light. The morning air was crisp, carrying with it the electric hum of anticipation. The driveway of the Carter estate was lined with neighbors, journalists, and even curious strangers who had followed the viral story from their screens into real life. They came expecting a spectacle, and I had every intention of giving them one. I stepped forward in a navy dress that caught the light with each movement, my heels clicking against the stone pavement. For a moment, I stood silently, letting the murmurs swell. Then I raised the microphone, my voice steady and clear. "I am not ashamed of my old car," I said, pausing as cameras flashed. That car carried my father's memory. It reminded me every day where I came from. But today, I let my eyes sweep across the crowd, catching Vanessa's smug smile in the back row. Today, I drive the future. As if on cue, the Tesla glided up the driveway, its sleek, midnight blue frame gleaming like a predator under the morning sun. The gasps rippled through the crowd, cameras clicking furiously. Vanessa's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. I walked toward the car, running my hand along its smooth surface before turning back to the audience. The future isn't just about wealth or appearances. It's about vision, courage, and the strength to rise again. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling into thunder. But the true twist had yet to unfold. David stood at the edge of the driveway, torn between pride and shame, his face caught in a storm of emotions. I beckoned him forward. "This isn't just my car," I said, my voice carrying. "This is ours." The second Tesla, in pearl white, pulled in behind the first, stunning the crowd into silence once more. I turned to my husband and pressed the keys into his hand. "Drive with me," I whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. David's eyes widened, a mix of disbelief and awe. In that moment, something shifted. The distance between us, widened by months of his silence and his family's scorn, began to close. He wrapped an arm around me, drawing me closer, as if realizing I had been fighting not only for myself, but for him too. From the corner of my vision, I saw Margaret's face pale. For the first time, the matriarch's composure cracked. Her hand gripped the edge of her chair, knuckles whitening. She'd always measured worth by wealth. Yet here I was, rewriting the definition in front of her. The crowd roared with excitement, reporters shouting questions, but my eyes stayed fixed on Margaret's trembling expression. The microsecond of fear in her gaze was all the confirmation I needed. The balance of power had shifted. Inside the house, the fallout began swiftly. Whispers spread about Vanessa, questions rising about how she, a woman who flaunted luxury handbags and designer shoes online, had not known her sister-in-law's true wealth. Some curious minds dug deeper, and within days the truth bled into the open. Vanessa's carefully curated image was a lie. Behind her filters and her laughter were maxed-out credit cards, overdue bills, and desperate loans hidden in her husband's name. Screenshots of unpaid statements leaked online, her followers turning crueler than they had ever been to me. At family dinners, the comparisons grew louder. Margaret, once Vanessa's loudest supporter, grew quieter each time Aurelia Systems appeared in the news. The startup she mocked as nonsense was being hailed as the next great fintech disruptor. Investors poured in, and there I was, Emma, the invisible daughter-in-law, revealed as one of its architects. One evening, as we gathered in the living room, Margaret tried to regain control. "Appearances are not everything," she said stiffly, as if the words might stitch her crumbling authority back together. But the others were already looking at me differently. Respect replaced mockery, curiosity replaced dismissal. For the first time, I wasn't just tolerated, I was measured as someone who mattered. Vanessa sat in silence, her phone face down on the table, her eyes rimmed with the red of sleepless nights. She no longer dared to sneer. She had become the object of pity, the very thing she once made me. I excused myself early, climbing the stairs to the study. The house buzzed with murmured conversations behind me, but I needed none of it. At my desk, I opened the heavy iron safe in the corner. Inside lay documents thicker than the Aurelia contract, papers that bore the signatures of something far larger than a single company. My hand hovered over them, fingertips grazing the edges. No one in this house, not David, not Margaret, not even Vanessa, knew of this final card I held. Their world was already crumbling from what they had seen, but what hid inside this safe could topple far more. I closed the door softly, twisting the lock until it clicked shut. The secret would stay buried, for now. Downstairs, voices rose and fell, debating, questioning, accusing. But in my study, the silence was absolute. I leaned back in the leather chair, the echo of the safe's lock humming like a promise. The phoenix had risen, but the fire in its wings had not yet burned out. The applause, the cameras, the glittering image of the Teslas, it all faded quicker than I had expected. Triumph came with its own poison, and I tasted it every time I sat at the Carter family table. Respect had replaced laughter, yes, but affection had vanished entirely. The air was cold now, not with mockery, but with distance. David tried to bridge it, tried to pretend that nothing had shifted, but I could see it in his eyes when he looked at me. Awe mixed with unease. He held my hand, but sometimes it felt more like he was steadying himself than comforting me. Margaret's silence grew heavier with each visit. Once sharp-tongued, she now spoke in measured words, as though any slip might betray weakness. Yet beneath her calm, I sensed the simmer. Power stripped from those who crave it doesn't disappear. It mutates, it hides, it plots. The others in the family had begun orbiting me instead of her. Decisions about gatherings, finances, even casual conversations. People glanced at me for approval, for guidance. I had become the center, the anchor, the one who defined the room. And though I had fought for that place, the weight of it pressed harder than I'd imagined. One evening, I stood in the study, staring at my reflection in the glass of the locked safe. My face looked sharper somehow, harder. The same eyes that once burned with humiliation now gleamed with calculation. The thought unsettled me. Have I become the villain I swore to defeat? I whispered into the silence. The question lingered, unanswered, heavy as stone. The answer began to take shape days later, during a lunch at Margaret's home. She had prepared everything with unusual care. Flowers, silverware, her favorite china. It was not hospitality, it was theater. Vanessa sat quietly, broken of her old arrogance while David picked at his food. Margaret cleared her throat. Emma, you've certainly risen beyond what anyone expected. Her voice was smooth, too smooth. But tell me, did you ever stop to think who lit the spark that drove you to such heights? I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean? Her smile was thin, her gaze sharp. It was me. The words landed like a slap. She leaned forward, her hands folded neatly on the table. You think Vanessa humiliated you out of jealousy alone? Do you think I said nothing out of weakness? No, Emma. I wanted you tested. I wanted you provoked. Only through fire does steel emerge. David shifted uncomfortably. Mother, she cut him off with a look. Don't act surprised, David. You know I never trusted Emma to be strong enough for this family. I needed to see if she would bend, or if she would break. I sat frozen, the room spinning. Memories reassembled like puzzle pieces. The cutting remarks, the silence, the complicit laughter. It hadn't been random cruelty, it had been orchestration. She had pulled the strings, using Vanessa as her instrument, waiting to see what I would do. The realization should have made me feel victorious. Instead, it hollowed me, because as I stared into her eyes, I saw my own reflection staring back, cold, unyielding, relentless. Later that night, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, the glow of the lamp catching the angles of my face. I hardly recognized the woman staring back. I had become sharper, harder, ruthless in ways I once despised. Margaret's shadow loomed inside me, growing stronger with every triumph. "Mirror breaks," I muttered, touching the glass. The woman in the reflection did not smile back. David entered quietly, his tie loosened, exhaustion in his eyes. "Emma," he said softly, "what she said, is it true?" I turned to him. "She set me up, David. She let me suffer, let me burn, all so she could see if I'd rise." His jaw tightened. "She's still my mother, and I'm your wife," I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. The silence stretched, thick with something neither of us wanted to name. Finally, he whispered, "I can't stand between you two forever. At some point, I'll have to choose." The words cut deeper than Vanessa's laughter ever had. It wasn't a threat. It was inevitability. That night, as David lay beside me in restless sleep, I sat awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind spun with Margaret's revelation, David's ultimatum, and the reflection that refused to soften. The triumph I had craved had come with a cost, and the bill was only just beginning to arrive. When the dawn crept through the curtains, I rose and walked to the safe. My hand lingered on the lock, the documents inside whispering promises of even greater power. I could end this war once and for all. I could crush Margaret, silence her forever, claim the Carter family as mine in truth as well as name. But as I stood there, I realized the choice would not be mine alone. It would be David's. And whichever side he chose would decide not only the fate of this family, but who I would become. The morning after David's words, the house felt heavier than ever. His silence over breakfast spoke louder than any fight we'd had before. Margaret's shadow lingered at the table even though she wasn't there, her presence woven into every glance, every pause, every bite of toast left uneaten. I walked into the study after he left for work and stared at the safe. The documents inside called to me like a siren. One signature, one carefully timed reveal, and I could end her reign. I could dismantle Margaret's hold on this family and strip her of every last shred of influence. But the longer I stood there, the more a strange thought pressed into me. What if destroying her meant destroying myself? What if my reflection in the glass wasn't Margaret's shadow consuming me, but a warning that I was about to step into the same cycle she had crafted? I sat at the desk, fingers tapping against the wood. For years, they had laughed at me, mocked me, cast me aside. I had dreamed of this moment, of revenge, of a final strike that would silence them all. And yet, now that I stood at the precipice, I found myself wondering whether true victory lay not in destruction, but in restraint. That afternoon, I called a family meeting. The Carters gathered reluctantly, tension weaving through the room like smoke. Vanessa avoided my gaze, her once sharp eyes dulled by weeks of humiliation. Margaret sat rigidly, her face a mask of authority she was desperate to hold on to. David sat beside me, torn in two, his silence a blade cutting both ways. I rose slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I know what you all think of me," I began, my voice steady but soft. "You think I've been playing a game of power. You think every move I've made was about proving you wrong." I looked at Margaret holding her gaze, and maybe part of that is true. But I'm tired of this game. Whispers fluttered through the room, but I raised a hand. I could expose everything. I could drag us all into the mud, air every debt, every failure, every cruelty. But what would that leave? A family burned to ash. Vanessa looked up for the first time, eyes wide. So what then? You'll just let it all go? I let the silence stretch before answering. No, I won't forget, but I will forgive. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to let this war define me. The words seemed to echo, sinking into the walls themselves. Margaret's mask cracked for just an instant, her lips tightening, her hand trembling against her chair. She had expected a fight, a blow, a ruthless strike. She had not expected mercy wielded like a blade, sharper than vengeance. Sometimes silence, I said quietly, is the loudest revenge. David exhaled, a sound of both relief and confusion. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as the woman caught in his family's shadow, but as someone who had chosen her own light. The weeks that followed shifted everything. Margaret, stripped of the drama she fed on, grew smaller. Without battles to fight, her words lost their weight. People stopped glancing at her for approval. They turned to me instead, not because I demanded it, but because I gave them stability. Vanessa disappeared from the spotlight. Her debts, her lies, her digital persona, it all crumbled. She retreated into quiet, avoiding gatherings, her laughter gone. Once the star of every room, she became a ghost, a shadow moving quietly along the edges. And me, I found myself standing in places I never thought I'd belong. Boardrooms, conferences, interviews. Aurelia Systems grew into something far greater than I'd dreamed, its name tied to resilience, to empowerment. My old sedan remained parked quietly in the garage, untouched, a relic I would never part with. The Tesla, however, became a symbol, not of wealth, but of transformation. At every turn, people remembered the story. The wife mocked for her old car who returned driving the future. It wasn't the machine that mattered, it was the metamorphosis it represented. Yet late at night, I still found myself staring into mirrors, searching the reflection for traces of Margaret. Sometimes I saw her, sometimes I saw myself, and sometimes I couldn't tell the difference. One evening, I stood in the driveway, the Tesla humming softly beside me, its lights casting long shadows. David joined me, his arm brushing mine. He said nothing, but the choice was still there, lingering unspoken between us. His loyalty, torn between mother and wife, had not yet been tested to its breaking point. I looked up at the stars, the night air cool against my skin. If you were me, I whispered, almost to myself, would you forgive, or would you destroy them? The question hung in the air, unanswered, stretching out into the darkness. And in that silence, I realized the story wasn't finished. Not really, because the true legacy wasn't the car, or the company, or even the power. The true legacy was the choice. What we do when the fire burns low, when victory no longer tastes sweet, when the shadows whisper that destruction is easy, but mercy is harder. The choice to rise, the choice to forgive, the choice to be something greater than the game.